Colonel Larry Wilkerson, welcome to the podcast and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Good to be with you. And as I said earlier, I'm not sure I know of anything about this year coming to be happy about yet, anyway.
You're so right. It's been a depressing 2024. Um, what's your overview of the year gone by? What do you think is going to be the most lasting effect of the events from 2024, whether good or bad?
In 26 days, I'll be 80 years old. I like to think that about 65 years of that, maybe a little bit less, have been sentient years. That is to say, I was a thinking person. I've never experienced a year like the one that just went by, nor the year before that in many respects with regard to Ukraine and other crimes of the American empire. And I thought, having served Colin Powell during the time when a president of the United States actually made public policy human torture was bad enough. And then, hold your breath, it's going to get a lot worse. Ukraine and Gaza and all the surrounding chaos that the empire has created, from really the Baltic Sea all the way down to Bandar Abbas and Chabahar at the southern end of the Persian Gulf, is something I never thought I would see in my lifetime, and certainly not see as a direct result of the empire's actions.
It's so true, and I'm glad you said that. I was just thinking, is it just me, or was that the worst year that I can remember? Also, it just seems like the West, USA-led West, they talk about America talks about make America great again, and the West is kind of talking in similar terms. But it seems like they're hell bent on making America great, not by making America great, but by destroying everything else. And it just seems like that we're starting fires everywhere.
There's a lot of truth to that, I think. And I've been trying, for almost 20 years, I taught what we call national security decision making, which essentially meant those fateful decisions that a president of the United States makes to send young men and young women in harm's way and to kill other people in the world. We studied every such decision, from Harry Truman's decision in 1950 to oppose the North Korean invasion of South Korea, all the way up to President Obama's feckless and really stupid decision to hasten NATO into Libya. And I thought that through a lot of students, 400 or 500 students, very, very bright students on 2 campuses, that I had developed or was developing, and one never finishes this sort of work, a theory of what the strategic approach of the empire was after, for example, the quintessential statement by George W. Bush in the 2002 National Security Strategy, essentially that we would tolerate no opposition whatsoever. That's what that very public document says. Doesn't matter how small or insignificant that opposition might seem at the time we discover it, we're going to kill it.
Yeah.
We're either going to kill it through sanctions or military action, or now increasingly, because our military is falling apart, proxy military action.
Yeah.
That's one reason why we're stirring up Georgia, we're stirring up Romania, we're stirring up the great Baltic states to take on the secret Russian fleet in the Baltic Sea. We're stirring up Ukraine still, and we're stirring up all manner of people in the Levant, from Lebanon to Gaza to Syria. Who knows what's next? And I've mended and am working on a new theory now, and I think it's much closer to the truth, and I shudder to think it took me so long to figure this out. And that theory is that we are so frightened, the empire is so frightened, inchoately frightened, or in some cases very, very carefully and I might say strategically frightened, because when you look at Elon Musk and you look at J.D. Vance and you look at Peter Thiel and other of these billionaires who are now just as much a part of the American empire's leadership as anything else. When you look at them, you understand that they are truly frightened of this prospect, and that is the massive power shift that's taking place now, back to where it was for 3,000 years
Yeah.
to the east, with China as the magnet, the vacuum cleaner, if you will, sucking that power eastward rather than westward. And they're scared to death of that. And they will do anything to stop that, including starting wars all over the world that create chaos that gives that momentum pause. And that I think is a closer theory to the truth. Just as I worked out finally, it takes me a long time to learn things. I worked out finally that Af-Pak and the Jewish lobby, as John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt claim most poignantly, is not really the effective ingredient here. It's the reverse. The empire is using Israel. It's not Israel using the empire. It's the empire using Israel. Lindsey Graham on the floor of the Senate about a month ago let the dog slip out when he said, listen, people, if they weren't killing those Arabs, we'd have to be killing those Arabs. I think that's far more the truth than anything anyone else has been putting out. And I don't think the lobby, other than being a propaganda mechanism and a cover, is anything more than what it seems on the surface. Just that. It's a foreign power trying to influence the U.S. government. And there's no question they do some, particularly in the Congress. But the leadership of the empire is using Israel, just like it's using Ukraine.
I remember Biden said that if Israel didn't exist, we would have to create an Israel. And I didn't understand at the time. I was thinking, what benefit is Israel to America? But if you look at it the way you're presenting it, in that it's the empire that's using Israel, not the other way around,
Yes.
then it makes more sense.
Yes, I think that's my that's my new theory anyway. I'm busy trying to put it down on paper so I can. There are a couple of people that put me onto this earlier and got me thinking about it. One is Frankopan and his marvelous book, The Silk Roads: A New History of the World. And another one was Hugh Pope, who you may know, Oxford-trained linguist, who also is a journalist and has lived a long time in Istanbul and other places in the Turkic world. And he wrote a book that essentially said, do you know that for 4,000 plus kilometers from Xinjiang province all the way to Istanbul, you can do trade and commerce because every language is Turkic based and people can talk to each other in the bazaars, in the streets, whatever. They might not hold a philosophical discussion, but they can certainly trade. They can barter, they can exchange, and they can do commerce, even modern commerce. And that struck me when I put it together with Frankopan's book about how for 3,000 years, the real power in the world was not in the West, it was in the East. And even the Western Roman Empire, which we pay so much obeisance to and fashioned our own government after, was puny compared to the Persian Empire, the Mongol Empire, the Mughal Empire, and even the Ottoman Empire, and a host of others. And now all of that is reversing itself. It's going back the other way, and we're fighting desperately and will use any means, and this scares me, because when it comes to the final battle, as it were, when it comes to us losing in a battle with China, or God forbid, China, Russia, Iran together, we'll use nuclear weapons.
Yeah, I think that's all right. Because when you were saying that the USA will not tolerate any opposition, that's what I was thinking. That it's not even opposition that they're trying to destroy, but they're just trying to destroy anyone who, through legitimate means, might be doing well and has a bright future ahead of them.
Yes,
and for some reason,
they use as an excuse oftentimes, as did my president George W. Bush when I was serving in his administration. And I think even more dangerous, perhaps, than if he were just doing it for power purposes, he believed it. He believed that he was bringing democracy to Iraq, less so to Afghanistan, but still that was part of his motivation. And he thought that was a positive purpose. Don't think so, Mr. President. You bring democracy at the point of a gun, you bring democracy, you bring freedom, whatever good title you want to use, at the point of a gun and a bayonet, it is not going to be very well appreciated.
Yeah. How do you see what's happening in Georgia? Do you think trouble's over, or do you think it's a pause and
We're still
still
there,
live?
and we paid off just as we did in all the other so-called color revolutions and disturbances that you didn't see the CIA's hand in them much of the time, because now the CIA uses civilian organizations, uses things like the IRI and uh, uh, things we call quahogs, quasi-government organizations and NGOs, to be a front for them. And those NGOs, of course, push democracy. They push freedom of the press. They push all the dictates of what we say is a functioning democracy. But what they're really doing is working for the empire to overthrow the government in power at that point and put in place a government that sides with the empire. And that's what's happening in Georgia. That's what's happening in Moldova. It's what's happening in Romania. It's what's happening all across that belt of chaos as far as we can do it. I think it's even going to happen in Syria. Now, there's some forces there that are aligned right now that it's going to be difficult, but I think that's probably what Barbara Lee's objective was when she went to Damascus, to tell then leader that yeah, you can't deal with Iran. You shouldn't invite Iran back in. Well, what the hell are you doing telling the newly invested leader in Damascus, whomever he might be or she might be ultimately, that they can't deal with a neighboring state or with any other state? But that's what we did right away. And that's the way the empire acts. So you're going to see more of this, and you're going to see it, I think, increasingly until this power shift has taken place. And that could take a very long time. Throw into that the fact that we're all confronting an existential crisis we like to call the climate change or climate change. And it is. I've been studying it now for almost 15 years. It is an existential crisis. May take all the way to the end of this century before it becomes existential in a way that everyone understands and is literally running away from the floods of, but it will get us. And in the meantime, frightening as climate change and more immediate is the nuclear weapons crisis, where the empire has discarded every single treaty that was painfully arrived at during the Cold War, to include the most dangerous weapons treaty of all, the INF Treaty, which we discarded. And now the Russians, anticipating that they would have to do something eventually, I suspect, have gotten ahead of us 5 to 7 years with regard to the development of the best INF weapons in the world now. Their avant-garde system and their system that they're using on Ukraine, these high velocity weapons that no one can shoot down. Absolutely impossible to shoot down a missile that's moving at 33,000 kilometers per hour. Oh, there's still conjecture about it. The person whom I trust most on it is a MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology professor emeritus, who studied these things for a long, long time. And there is a lot of discussion out there as to whether or not the Oreshnik is just as deadly a missile in a very pinpoint strike manner if it has no warhead at all, simply because of the way it re-enters the regime where it is going to impact something on the ground, the speed with which it re-enters. You take the one that we know most about. It may have had a conventional warhead on it, or warheads, all of which were detonated by the velocity really that it was coming in at. And it was a demonstration simply of the technology that they had and the fact that you cannot bring it down. You can't shoot it down. If you put a low yield nuclear warhead on it, or even a large conventional warhead, it would, of course, amplify the damage it can do. But you take the avant-garde system, for example, which is designed for nuclear weapons. I'm told by people who know a lot more about it than I do that if you just let that missile hit in a central point in Kiev, for example, or in Washington or in London. No warhead at all on it, conventional or nuclear. The speed alone with which it hit would devastate a city block. I mean, you'd eliminate a city block, much the way a low yield nuclear weapon would, but without any residual radiation. So this is clearly a new technology, a new regime of these missiles and the speed with which they move. Imagine this, for example. You wouldn't even need to put a warhead on an Oreshnik. And by the way, Admiral Gorshkov, the Russian frigate that was headed for Cuba, has a few of these high velocity missiles on it. People who are saying, well, Gorshkov hasn't got any kind of capability to do anything. Gorshkov has capability to sink an American aircraft carrier in about 5 minutes. So you wouldn't even have to have a detonating type warhead on it, because the devastation with which it hit that carrier at that speed would put a hole right through the carrier. Might even break it in half, probably would cause it to sink instantly, just like a 65 centimeter weight-homing torpedo would cause the carrier to sink. So we're just waiting in the Empire, waiting for someone to sink an aircraft carrier, or two or three. And by the way, we only have about 5 to 6 at any given time that are operational now, and that we can man because we can't recruit sufficient sailors for the ships we have. What I was going to say is there are several levels of perception that I think one has to look at Ukraine through, the prisms you look at it through. And there are several prisms on both sides: NATO, Washington, London, and Moscow. Putin has to look at it from the perspective of he's winning, no question about it. Just a matter of time till he rolls up the entire country of Ukraine if he wants to, but he doesn't want to, because he has no desire to rule over a bunch of partisan Nazis in some cases that'll permeate the other part of Ukraine and bug him and his occupying force for the rest of his life and the rest of Russia's life. He doesn't want to do that. So he wants to stop with what he's got, which is all he wanted in the first place, and have some kind of negotiation, a ceasefire, and a peace agreement. And there has to be some very solid principles to that peace agreement. No NATO membership, eternal neutrality for Ukraine, which would have been the best thing to do from the very start, but the empire wouldn't allow it. Then you got to look at it through NATO and London and Washington's perspective, and there are a number of perspectives there. One is Joe Biden. Joe Biden and Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan. They're not going to leave Ukraine alone.
Yeah.
For the reasons I stated before, because they want chaos and they want to reestablish their economic hegemony over Europe, particularly Germany. So why did we take down the Nord Stream 2 pipeline? We took it down because we wanted Germany's economy to suffer, because they were becoming the engine of a $22 trillion annual GDP that equaled our own. And we didn't like that. We don't treat people in the world like they're friends and allies, not really. If they're doing something antagonistic to our interests, economic, financial, or otherwise, we're going to use them in a proxy war, or we're going to do something to bleed them, and that's what we're doing. So Putin intuits a lot of this. And when Sergei Lavrov and others have said, including Putin himself in English, he cannot trust us, that we're duplicitous, we're lying, and there's no way he can trust anything we say, he means it. And I think he's right. And when you interpret something like that about the empire, and the empire is armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons and apparently willing to use them, much more apparent that we're willing to use them than Putin is willing to use them, frankly, then he's got to be very careful. He's got to be very careful, not to mention the fact he has his own economic problems, and he has his own group in Russia that thinks he's not doing enough and not going hard enough and fast enough. And he's got people on the other side of the coin too. So he's got to deal with a home situation too. The bottom line, though, is that the United States will not turn loose, the empire will not turn loose of Ukraine as a major central ingredient in this turmoil that is designed to stop the power shift. And the most indicative element of that is the fact that China had every intent of making Ukraine the exit point for its now 16-hour railroad from its Pacific ports rather than the 2 to 3 days around the Horn or even through the canals or whatever, the entrepot of its introduction into Europe. That is to say, Ukraine was going to be the end of the base road initiative that would impact that $22 trillion economy. Got to stop that. And so we did, and we have, and we will not let it reignite. Putin probably knows that. He probably intuits it, if not, outright understands the strategy of the empire. He's not a dumb man by any stretch of the
No,
imagination.
he's not.
He's
I,
probably one of the best strategists in the world right now, and he's got some good people working for him too in that regard. So I think he understands this and he knows what he's up against.
I think you're right. I think he does have to be very careful. But part of me sometimes thinks that by being careful, is he actually encouraging the West to just push harder and harder because they don't see resistance? And I'm thinking at some stage, is he going to have to do what Iran had to do with Israel? Because Israel was doing assassinations and all sorts of things until Iran just turned around and then missiled Israel and to show power. At some point, is this what Russia's going to have to do, whether that's attacking inside Poland or a European country or even in a different battlefield, just American interests around the world?
I think Putin understands that, and I would agree with your assessment of a riposte that would be adequate or more adequate would be to hit something inside of NATO, an actual NATO country. That was, in fact, clearly identified as supporting the war in Ukraine. And there are plenty of facilities like that, even airfields with F-16s on them, training pilots to fly in Ukraine. But he's got to consider that if that were to take place, if he were to do something like that, then this duplicitous empire, which he knows he can't trust worth a darn, might do something really in response that he would then have to escalate his response to. And pretty soon you get to nuclear weapons.
Yeah,
And I think he understands now that the empire will use them in a heartbeat, that it will use them. We did it in 1945. We killed 150 million people, 150,000 people. Could have been 150 million if we'd done it the way some of them were talking. But the two bombs that we dropped on Japan probably immediately killed 150,000, maybe 200,000, and the residuals were a lot more than that. So the fact that we did it then, we have no compunction about using these weapons, and we will use them if we feel like it's getting, as Putin says all the time about his own security treaty organization, the collective security treaty organization. If it becomes existential, we'll use nuclear weapons, and we will. And he knows that. And having the two most highly armed nuclear states in the world face off one another, incidentally, something we had an ironclad rule about
yeah,
in the Cold War. Never would we allow the two nuclear armed states, the Soviet Union and the United States, to engage each other on the battlefield conventionally. Never, because that was too dangerous. Well, that's what we're doing now in Ukraine, and we're pushing the envelope every week. Joe Biden does not want to, and I think Joe Biden is dead for all practical purposes. Anthony Blinken and Jake Sullivan are running the government.
yeah,
And they want to leave Trump with a mess.
that's it. I think maybe in Putin's calculation, he probably also wants to just see out Biden's administration and see how he can deal with the next administration, whether he'll get more of like a reasonable engagement out of them.
I think you're right. I don't think this recent brouhaha over Lavrov's comments and Kellogg's comments, General Kellogg, our emissary apparently for the new administration, is really an indication of where we can go. I think we can go very swiftly to cutting off the money and cutting off the weapons and thus ending the war. Then the hard part is negotiating and trying to figure out how we're going to make some sort of peace endure.
Yeah,
That's the hard part.
yeah,
But with Trump, you never know. I watched him with Kim Il Sung or Kim Jong Il, Kim Jong Un. I got my Korean leaders mixed up. I dealt with all of them: Kim Jong Il, Kim Jong Un, and Kim Jong Un. I watched him deal with him, and I watched him really put South Korea in a mess because the government in South Korea that wants reunification and it wants a peace treaty badly represents the majority of the South Korean people. That's one of the reasons we're seeing the problems we're seeing right now with the South Korean president going to jail
Yeah.
because he didn't. But the majority of South Korea wants a peace treaty and they want reunification. And they thought Trump was going to bring it to them. They were ecstatic over the meeting with between the two leaders.
Yeah.
And when he didn't, it was a tremendous disappointment. So this is the kind of thing Trump does, and that worries me with regard to Ukraine in particular.
Yeah. I'm thinking if Trump is going to do something about the war in Ukraine, surely it has to be, if not sooner, then at least within the first 100 days. And if he can't sort out then, I think this is then going to drag on throughout his presidency, no?
It very well could. There are people in this country who are smart people who think that's probably what we're going to have is a low burner war for the entire time Donald Trump is president. But there's just too much potential for that low burner war to suddenly turn into something that no one wants. And
Yeah.
that's so dangerous. It's just
Yeah.
terribly dangerous.
I think the most stupidity in this whole scenario is coming out of Europe, how they've allowed their own economies to be destroyed for no good reason at all.
Yes, we seem to have no regard for friend, ally, or enemy. In fact, in some cases, you could regard our regard for titular enemies as better than our regard for our formal allies. It's kind of, I mean, let's face it, we have made a major non-NATO ally out of Israel. For all practical purposes, we have made Israel our foremost ally.
Yeah.
And at the same time, we're destroying it. Right now, we are helping to destroy Israel. I doubt very seriously that Israel will survive this.
That's so true. How do you see with Putin coming, do you, I'm sorry, actually, before we even go there, how do you see, from what was happening in 2024, the changing nature of warfare itself? Do you think, I think that's something, one kind of long-lasting effect that we're going to see out of the conflicts that came out of 2024?
Yes, it's something that an old man like me, I've been out of the military now since 1997. I served 31 years in the military. It makes an old man like me really shudder at the prospects, as most old men do when modernity hits them. But the prospects in my mind are just daunting in terms of technology. When I hear these stories of the AI, for example, artificial intelligence,
Yeah.
that is orchestrating the death of almost anyone that comes within shooting range of it in Gaza, with
Yes.
no discrimination whatsoever. Doctors, surgeons, nurses, babies, doesn't matter. It's going to kill you. If it acknowledges your presence, it's going to kill you.
Wow.
And understand that men and women put these things on the battlefield and are now orchestrating them in the killing of thousands of people. And I do think the underestimates of Gaza are just appalling. I think we've probably got 200,000 dead Palestinians already.
Yeah.
This idea of 45 or 55,000 is just preposterous. There's far more dead than that. And a lot of these things are being developed on the battlefield even as we go by, as time goes by. And they are deadly, and they are not the kind of thing that this old soldier would like to see being developed.
Yeah.
I think it's a tragedy what we're doing and the experiments we're conducting on live people.
Yeah. Have you heard about recently China announcing its new fifth and sixth generation aircrafts? There's been a lot of kind of buzz about that recently.
Yes, we keep making technological exchanges, as it were. We steal each other's plans We photograph each other's aircraft. We build aircraft that look just like their aircraft, or they build aircraft that look just like
Like Apple
ours.
and Samsung.
You would say there's only so much you can do within the state of art right now if you're going to make what looks and acts like a conventional fighter with a lot more technology and a lot more capability. I'm waiting for the one that comes out that you don't even see. I'm waiting for the one that comes out with an entirely new set of parameters for what you might call an aerial vehicle. Um, there are many people who thought the RPAs were that, the remotely piloted aircraft. And my son, who's a squadron, is a Reaper squadron pilot, would say that. But I think that's still more or less within the realm of technology that I can envision. I think there are things just around the corner, and we may, and the Chinese may at this moment, be working on these things. So the things to worry about are not these sleek-looking aircraft that take off carriers and airfields and do the conventional thing, more or less. I think the thing to worry about is these things we don't see.
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. On New Year's Eve, I was at my daughter's farm. It's about 50 miles north of Washington in Maryland. And she says, "Come outside, Dad, and bring the binoculars." And I go outside with my binoculars, and she's got her binoculars, and we're looking into the night sky. So, "Are we looking for the Pleiades? Are we looking for Orion? What are we looking for?" She said, "No, look over there on the horizon." I did, and all of a sudden my binocular was filled with lights as drone after drone took off from the horizon. They're using the farmland up there, the agricultural land up there where there are not that many people, a lot of cattle and horses, but not a lot of people. They're using them. Someone is. We don't even know who it is. Is it Amazon? Is it FedEx testing delivery vehicles? We watch these big drone platforms move around the horizon, and then little ones collected all around them, as if they were coming to the mothership to gather packages, and then they would go down and deliver the packages. So our conclusion at the end of this hour or so we watched was that we were watching Amazon or FedEx or someone experimenting with what's going to be the delivery means of the future. But I don't know. I have no idea.
We're looking at aliens.
No one could tell us the next day, of the few people we met, no one could tell us if it was government or private.
Wow. This is the thing now, private technology is getting so advanced as well. How do you see with Trump's attitude towards Panama Canal? Do you think that's just bluster at the moment, or do you think that's something like a conflict in waiting that we're going to see?
I missed what?
Panama Canal.
Oh, how about Greenland? I think this is just Trump. I think he makes these statements, and then probably 24 hours later, he forgets he's made them unless someone reminds him.
Yeah, I think he makes some of these statements just to see what reaction he gets.
Exactly, and to keep the population out there percolating. You know, oh man, he's making America great again. We're going to get Greenland. Have you heard? He's going to take the Panama Canal back. I don't think he'll do any of these things, but it's disruptive to the maximum for him to be making all these mercurial statements that people have to wonder what he means and what he's going to do. More alarming to me are the statements he's making about tariffs, the statements he's making about taxes, and the statements he's making about, "I'll take some people down to Miami and fly them out of the country forever." I mean, I guess what he's going to do is he's going to do a Hollywood type thing. He's going to gather up a few people, take them down to Miami or down to the southern border of Texas or whatever, and then he's going to tell them to leave, and then he's going to tell the American people, "See, I did it," just like he built his wall. I hope he's not really going to try to deport 5.5 million people, who incidentally are the backbone of America's agricultural output. So these kinds of statements disturb me a lot more than Panama and Greenland.
Yeah. I was listening to a Chinese analyst about these tariffs, and that's what he was saying, that the tariff isn't going to do much to China. The tariff is not a tax on China. Tariffs are tax on American people.
Yes.
So it's going to. have a
Inflation,
devastating effect.
yeah, and inflation's already very bad here.
Yeah,
We have a lot of people. I'd say we probably have close to 50% of America living month to month.
mm,
Don't
yeah.
know if they're going to be able to make it to the next month.
I think one of the things with Trump, um, he is unpredictable, and sometimes that works in his favor because he's able to do things that other traditional politicians just would never think about. And like talking to North Korea and these things, sometimes he does things that work. But at the same time, he has this thing where he's known to get on well with authoritarian type um, leaders. And I think so at some point that could actually, um, so some leader in some country might think he's going to be better off if he stands up against Trump, and he might make a fatal mistake.
That could happen, but then again, I wonder if Donald Trump really knows, and if there's anyone around him who knows, or who, if he knows, would tell him how ineffective the U.S. military is right now. And it's mainly because of the recruiting crisis.
Mm,
We simply cannot recruit young men and young women for the armed forces.
yeah,
If we built the 350 ships that Trump said he was going to build in his first presidency, we couldn't sail them. If we built the fighter aircraft that Trump said he was going to build up the defense budget to build, we couldn't fly them. We don't have people. They will not enlist. They will not volunteer. We have the lowest propensity for military service we've ever polled in this country. It's 9%.
wow,
9% of the 4.5 million 18 to 24-year-olds in America, 9% have
wow.
any propensity to serve.
How much has it been historically?
I'm sorry?
How much was it historically?
It's usually run somewhere around a third to maybe even as high as 40%. And
Wow.
if you go into the what I would call the traditional Confederate states, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and you go into Oklahoma, you go into the interior of Maine, West Virginia, you would find it as high as 50% just based on the bonuses because we were paying $50,000 signing bonuses. Now it's fallen off remarkably amongst the last bastion of propensity to serve. That's military families,
Wow.
families like my own, where someone in the family has been in the military in the past. That was the best place to recruit.
Right.
Now those families are recommending to their 18, 19, 20-year olds not to
Don't do it.
serve.
Mm, mm. Wow. By the way, so before we go into West Asia, Middle East, what happened in New Orleans? Is that something that's being talked about a lot in America? How are people taking that?
It is. I think definitively now the various law enforcement elements, including the FBI, have concluded that the young man was inspired by ISIS. Don't know what that means actually. That he acted alone and that it was a one-off sort of thing. At the same time, I have to remind people who tell that to me, I have to remind them that something like this happens about every week in America. So what do you mean one-off? We've got crazies, nuts in this country who do this sort of thing. We've got people who are motivated, apparently, as he was, by what the empire is doing in the world. And we've got people who are mentally unstable. So we have something like this happen almost every week, if not every week, certainly every month, where someone kills some people in a way that we find inexplicable. Might that be a comment on our society? Might that be a comment on an empire that is run amok? Might it be a part of what we're doing in the world that's coming back to haunt us in our own society, our own country? I'm sure there's some psychiatrists and psychologists who would tell you that.
Yeah. So looking into West Asia, how do you see the current situation in Syria, especially the fact how there's now tensions building up between Turkey and USA and Turkey and Israel?
I think we've got a real situation for crisis writ large, if we don't already have it all over the Levant in Syria. I heard yesterday great kudos for Mohammed bin Salman and the royals in Riyadh because they are going to help Syria build its democracy. Well, the last time I heard someone say they were going to help some country in the Middle East build a democracy, it wasn't Turkey Al Faisal. It wasn't Prince Bandar. It wasn't Mohammed bin Salman. So what does that mean that Saudi Arabia, who fears democracy like it fears a snake in the desert,
Yeah,
what does that mean that they're going to help this gentleman in Damascus build a democracy? And then, as you said, you've got the Turks who apparently are not going to stop until they have reduced the Kurds to a population that they think they can handle. I don't know if that means down to zero, but the Kurds are always, the party that's left out by the empire and anybody else that happens to be around. We abandoned them in northern Iraq. We abandoned them everywhere else we've been with them. It's a real recipe for chaos for a long time to come, I think, which again is what the empire wants in that part of the world.
that's it. Because I would have thought by now USA would actually have thrown the Kurds under the bus. The fact that they're still supporting them to the irritation of Turkey, do
Well,
they have some
yeah.
longer term plans for the Kurds?
Well, one of the reasons I think is very, very immediate because we have only somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 troops and an equal number of contractors there in Syria, mostly protecting the oil fields, which incidentally have been shipping oil to Israel. Uh, and we know that. We know that. In fact, that's why we're there. But that's not enough to protect what we're doing. So we need the Kurds to help us protect what they're doing. In addition to having the Jordanians and the Iraqis at our back, Jordanians probably more dependable than the Iraqis, but nonetheless, they are, quote, friendly forces in the area. And of course, you've got the Israelis pushing down there all the way down to the southern end of the Sea of Galilee now, around Tiberias. And uh, they were even about 3 days ago, they were even in some villages around Quneitra. So all those forces are there, mostly undisturbed by the United States because they're protecting us. They're helping us protect our troops. We don't want to put any more troops in Syria if we don't have to. And Donald Trump's the one that said he wouldn't put troops in Syria, period. And then he went and said, "I have the oil. I've got the oil. Don't worry, America. Don't worry. I've got the oil. I've got the oil in Syria." But somebody walked up to him and told him, "Those troops are guarding that oil. We'll pump it to Israel."
I think that makes a lot of sense. Why? Because I was thinking, why is the USA still backing the Kurds at the risk of the annoyance of a NATO ally, Turkey?
Yeah.
That makes sense what you're saying.
It's not unlike the situation we had in northern Iraq in the first Gulf War, where we promised the Kurds we'd protect them because the Peshmerga were protecting us to a certain extent on that flank, and then we left and abandoned them.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking that it's going to happen again. Probably the Kurds see the writing on the wall as well.
They could, and if I were they, I'd be working with that new leader in Damascus, however
Yeah,
feudal it might be. I'd still be working with him for an autonomous area where he at least would try to protect me,
yeah.
along with my own people.
How do you see Hezbollah? It seems like they're getting ready to get to the end of the ceasefire and then start kind of clashes and defending Lebanon again against Israel.
Well, I think the truth of the matter is that Israel has never honored the ceasefire.
Yeah.
Israel made a ceasefire and didn't honor it, but couldn't violate it majorly because they were planning on doing exactly what they're doing. They knew this was coming, and they knew the push was going to be on, and they knew they'd be able to expand the Golan area that they're occupying. So they diverted some troops to that and made a ceasefire. But look at every day they violated the ceasefire.
Yeah.
Every day they bombed somebody in Lebanon. They have said, "Oh, we found somebody walking across the border. He's Hezbollah," and
Yeah.
they have not honored the ceasefire.
So it's
So
been a one-sided ceasefire.
yeah, and Hezbollah, I understand. I don't know how they've done it. I've been trying to find out some particulars, but I haven't been able to. They've reestablished some sort of line of communication with Iran and with their resupply capability. I don't know
Really?
whether it's yeah, I don't know whether it's by transport because we have ships all over the oceans now that are operating without their transponders on.
Yeah.
Lloyd's of London, for example, one of the biggest insurer, they've started sending their agents to ports, key ports in the world, and they have clipboards. And when a ship comes in, they look at it to see if it might be a ship they have insured because they can't track it because it's got its transponder off. Now, this is a violation of international law, but it's happening. We're blaming it on the Russians. We're saying, the secret fleet and all this kind of stuff. But people don't understand that a state can ship without insurance. A state is judged under international law to have deep enough finances that it can ship without insurance, but not a private concern or a black concern, if you will, operating in the black economy. They go out and try to seek some insurance. So we got all this happening across the oceans right now with ships sailing with nobody knowing where they are or what they're carrying or who they're flagged with or whatever. So you could be getting that. That's really the way the Houthis are getting resupplied to a certain extent with regard to Iran. We don't have enough ships for a blockade, but we do have a sort of patrolled area in
Yeah.
that off Yemen, between Socotra and Yemen, and then outside Socotra. So, and the Red Sea itself, all the Red Seas become very dangerous for the U.S. Navy too. So, you can smuggle things fairly efficiently and fairly easily these days. Is that the way they're doing it? I don't know. I don't know because I would have thought the Israelis, having the intelligence that they do, Mossad, I mean, the Israelis would be using some of those submarines to sink some of these ships in the Eastern Mediterranean if they were indeed coming in that way. I don't know. But I am told that Hezbollah has reestablished at least some logistics chain with Iran.
Wow. That's a very short period in which to do that. That's quite amazing. Also, I was just thinking, so Israel wanted to have their ceasefire with Lebanon, with Hezbollah, so that they can carry out whatever plans they had in Syria.
Yes, we
However,
we told them this was coming.
yeah. However, the fact is now, because Israel is a small country with a small population, and a small army, which is kind of thinly spread out already. So now they've got a bunch of troops that they need to keep stationed towards Syria. They're also now concentrating on Yemen. And at the end of this ceasefire that's coming, they're going to have to then start re-engagement with Hezbollah again. So how are they going to manage all of that? And I'm thinking that they know that, so they probably have some plan for Hezbollah again, a bit like what they did last time, like um, kind of cheeky terrorist tactics rather than a kind of an open war.
That's a good question, or a series of good questions. You didn't mention, I don't think you did. I don't remember you saying it. Israel's losing people every day. They're losing people. One estimate I had yesterday was almost 1 million people have left. Another estimate I had that sounded more reasonable was 350, 400,000, almost
Wow.
500,000. People are just leaving, and many of them are not coming back
Yeah.
because they were promised a safe haven, and it ain't safe.
Yeah.
Put it bluntly. So Israel has enormous problems right now, economic problems, financial problems. If it weren't for the empire, Israel would have sunk already. JP-8 for their jets, for example. The only place they can only refine in Israel about 300,000 gallons, I think it is, a day or so. They're burning that in several hours with these 100-plane strikes and such. So we're shipping them JP-8 at a fantastic rate. ExxonMobil, I think, has got the contract. Israel's in bad shape. As I said, I don't think Israel will be the state that it was when this is over, and may not be a state at all. We'll do everything we possibly can to keep them there because, as I said, they're our disciple. They're working for us.
Yeah. How do you think Israel plans to deal with Yemen and the Houthi? Do you think they're going to try some kind of decapitation of the leadership again over there, or do you think they don't have enough intelligence and enough
Well, you know,
assets?
they tried back there maybe 8 or 9 months ago. They sent commandos, and the Yemenis killed them all.
It didn't happen.
Yeah, about 70 people, as I understand.
Oh,
There
wow.
were some. I'm almost totally convinced there were some U.S. and some British with them. I don't know how you get the Houthis. They're just they're they're irrepressible. They just keep coming. Um, You'd have to invade, I think, and Saudi Arabia and the UAE and coalition already tried that and got their ass handed to
Yeah,
them.
yeah. So
I
there
don't
is
know.
no solution.
I I don't know anyone that's ready to invade Yemen, but you'd probably have to do that, and then you'd still have guerrillas all over those
Yeah,
mountains.
yeah. By the way, so in your service, were you ever stationed in Afghanistan as well?
No, I did train Yemeni though.
Did you?
Yes, and it was a real combination. I'm sure I probably didn't train any of the present ones who are so resilient, but it was a real combination because sometimes I would get what they would their liaison officer at Fort Benning at the time, now Fort named after the general, I forget it now. Um, they would tell me they were goat farmers and they didn't want to be lieutenants in the infantry and they wanted to go home. And I would tell the liaison officer that, and he would give them a bull whipping. So, yeah, I'm sure there are Yemeni soldiers who are a lot tougher than these guys were. These were just conscripts. They've been picked up in the village, and given a uniform and a rifle. Go to the United States and get some training. So I haven't. I don't think I've seen these formidable soldiers that are over there now.
Wow. Yeah, the reason I was asking about Afghanistan, I'm not sure if you have heard how there's now border clashes starting between Afghanistan and Pakistan. And I think that's probably something to watch out for in days and weeks to come.
Yes, the real problem in Afghanistan, to me, as a strategist, was Pakistan. Always, Pakistan was duplicitous. They would tell you one thing on Monday and do another thing Monday night. They were complicit. The ISI was complicitous with the CIA and vice versa. The entity that ran Afghanistan for the United States was not ISAF. It was not NATO. It was not the United States military. It was the CIA. And the CIA was plugged in cheek and jowl with the ISI in Islamabad and elsewhere. And the whole purpose of the ISI was to keep Afghanistan in turmoil as a strategic backdrop to India, their real enemy. So there was no way anyone could ever stabilize Afghanistan so long as Pakistan was there and with those motives. And sometimes the civilian leadership in Pakistan didn't even know that.
Yeah.
Colin Powell and Pervez Musharraf had a long conversation about that in Colin Powell's office. And first thing Powell asked him was, why do you want to be president and a general? You can imagine the answers he got. But it was just something we accepted, and yet we knew that it was contrary to everything we were trying to do in Afghanistan, and that Pakistan would always be in there messing up anything we tried to do. So they're back. I mean, they're never going to leave that country because that country they think is absolutely essential to their defense against India.
Yeah. So yeah, I think things are kicking off over there. I think one of the problems for Pakistan is that so they've got a port in Gwadar in Balochistan in Pakistan, which they're leasing out to China, and the USA is not happy with that at all.
Yep.
And as a result, according to the Pakistani side of things, as a result, USA is supporting separatist movements in Balochistan, which are now being backed by the Taliban in Afghanistan, um, which is why one of the reasons recently the Pakistani army kind of sent fighter jets to attack inside Afghanistan, and it's all kicking off over there. So maybe it'll be something to watch out for in the next few weeks.
Yeah, it's another place where the empire is going to keep chaos going.
Yeah.
I mean, Pakistan has always played China and the United States off against one another. One minute they'll do something that pleases China and makes the U.S. mad, and then they'll do something that pleases the U.S. and makes China mad. And they keep a balance, or they try to keep a balance. But yes, that region is going to be in turmoil, just as the Caucasus is. You know, Georgia, we're there in Georgia right now trying to get that government that just got elected thrown out and
Yeah.
get the old government back in there, the one that wants to align with the EU and NATO. The current government has some brains. They want to keep everybody at a distance and just make money and have peace. And, you know, the Caucasus ought to be a place where people want to come and see the beautiful countryside and visit and everything, not, you know, allied with either Moscow or Berlin or Washington or whatever. But
Yeah.
this government's going to have a hard time maintaining that kind of neutrality because the empire doesn't want it.
Another thing that's happened recently in South Asia is that so Bangladesh, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh fled to India, Hasina Wajid, and since then, so the new government is now cozying up with Pakistan, and India is not liking that at all.
Yep.
And I think, yeah, so things are really stirring up in that part of the world as well. So yeah, I think that's going to be something to look at.
When you think for a moment that 1 out of every 5 humans on the face of the planet is Chinese, 2 out of every humans on the planet, all the humans on the planet are Chinese or Indian, and 3 out of 5 are Asian, you understand my dynamic about power.
Very true. Larry, I'm so grateful for your time. I've really enjoyed this talk. I'm really sorry about the technical problems we had, but thank you for your time. Let's do this again soon.
Surely. Take care. I'll wait till the recording stops.
Yeah, thank you so much.
It says 99% uploaded here.
Brilliant. It'll probably just take a minute or so.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Have you ever had the chance to go to Pakistan, visit Pakistan?
I was in Karachi. At that time we had a little consulate there. We were really worried about because it was very close to the street. It was right after 9/11. So it wasn't a very long visit, but it was a interesting visit.
Yeah, let me know if you ever go that way. I don't know if you knew about like General Hamid Gul, who was the head of ISI at the time. He was training the Taliban in Afghanistan.
What's the name again?
Hamid Gul.
Oh, yeah.
General Gul.
Yeah.
So yeah, one of my uncles was
in many respects. When I looked at the Pakistani military and the ISI and vice versa, I wondered who was the most powerful. And I finally concluded the ISI.
Yeah, especially in those days during the Afghan war, I think ISI had a lot of powers then.
Yeah.
So, but it's been really interesting. Thank you so much.
Sure.
I've really learned a lot from you today.
Take care.
Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.